Greetings. Well, I'm calling this video Not Again, Norman, a tribute to William Bill Moyer, who was the personnel manager of the Boston Symphony for many years. And this was after he had already been second trombone in the Boston Symphony, something we both shared. And he passed away on December 18th, 2024. He certainly lived a long life. I think he was 95 when he passed on, and he's in very good hands now. And there's just so many little stories that I'm sure anyone who knew him could tell. I'm going to tell a few of mine here in this tribute. The first time I met Bill was in 1968. And my father wanted to take me on a special trip for my bar mitzvah. And he said, let's go to Tanglewood together and visit your Aunt Jerry. And my Aunt Jerry was my father's sister, but she was married to Sherman Wald, who was from, I think, 1953 to 1989, principal bassoon of the Boston Symphony, and one of my great mentors, and we became great friends, and he was just great. And I was so excited, to see him and be at Tanglewood. And so where my Aunt Jerry and Uncle Sherm were living was in Mackinac Heights. A lot of BSO players throughout the years lived in Mackinac Heights. And the people who lived right in back of them, okay, but there was a distance, good distance between the homes, was Joey Silverstein, who was, of course, concertmaster of the Boston Symphony for a long time and retired to conduct and do solos with the Utah Symphony in 1984. But anyway, every morning I'd hear Uncle Sherm play these scales and all different articulations and all different rhythms. And he told me he does that. Every week he'll pick scales that fit the orchestra program. So it's just in his fingers already. Cool. And I would practice in the cabin. It's a little louder than bassoon, even though I was only 13. It was still a little louder than bassoon. And I'd practice all my stuff, and I'd have a Vivaldi cello concerto I'd play, and all this different kinds of things. And finally, Uncle Sherm came into the room and said, Normie, let's give the Silversteins a break. So, of course, I stopped and played more on my mouthpiece. But he said, let's go to Tanglewood. You'll meet Bill Moyer, who was second trombone up until recently, and now is the personnel manager of the Boston Symphony, and you can hear him play. Or he can hear you play. That's what it was. And it just reminds me right now, just to take a side note, when I went to Boston that same summer, he played for me a recording of the BSO live broadcast, international radio broadcast of the Mozart Requiem right after JFK was assassinated. And, of course, it has the tuba miram, which is a huge trombone solo for second. And Bill was playing it. Well, he certainly had the right audience worldwide. They were all tuned to the same thing, which is a very interesting thing my wife and I would talk about quite a bit. She'd say, her name's Carol Vieira, she would say, you know what? not all pieces are meant for a concert situation. I'd say absolutely. Maybe that's why I always feel awful playing Mozart Requiem. But anyway, she was saying that, the audience isn't tuned. They're tuned for a concert and hearing all the stuff. They're not in a state that you would be in to actually hear a requiem at someone's memorial or funeral. So Bill had an incredibly supportive audience, but still to rise to that situation, trombonist, how'd you like to do that one? And he played spectacularly. Just was right there, clean, clear, curved nicely, everything. Really did a terrific job. And so then I was going to go play for him. So I met him, and it was this, gosh, so nice and warm and smiling. And we went into a certain room, and I took out my horn, and he said, well, what would you like to play? So Bill Moyer's in front of me, Uncle Sherm's right to my left. And I said, the Song of King David. I wrote it before my bar mitzvah. He said, that's great, let's hear. So I played it, and he looked over at Uncle Sherm, and he said, oh, doesn't he have a beautiful tone? I thought, wow, that was nice. But he said, your arm is stiff. Your arm is stiff. Relax, relax. Just move it easily, easily. Let it just flow out. And I took it seriously. And things did start to lighten up just by him saying that, in the way that he said it. He wasn't like, okay, now you got to work on this, you got to work on this. He was very encouraging. And from that time on, all of our meetings, once I got in the orchestra, were just like that. In a certain kind of way. I mean, it went beyond relax your arm. But they were always pleasant. We always had this funny relationship where we were almost going to always laugh when we passed each other. So that was a great first experience. And then when I got into Boston University, Tanglewood Institute, and what was called the BMC, the Berkshire Music Center program, which was then called, now of course, the TMC, Tanglewood Music Center, I'd see him, and he was just as friendly and all that. And then I started to play extra with Pops, and would see him once in a while. It was always the same kind of thing, and he would remember that first time. And then when I auditioned for principal, trombone of the BSO, I was in the last 3 finalists when Ron Barron got the job. And I'd see Bill, and every time I'd get on stage to play, he'd say, bravo. He'd whisper a bravo. Probably broke the laws now. You're not supposed to do that. And then for second trombone, that was a little bit more of a battle for certain reasons. And it came down to a person and myself after we played with the orchestra and played, rounds before that, and then waited a few weeks, and we both got to play in the orchestra, and then have a final duo, playing a little bit of a solo, and then with the section. And quite a bit, actually. And after an hour deliberation, Bill came out, and he said to both of us, you both did a marvelous job. Bravo. It's been a very, very difficult decision for the committee, going back and forth and back and forth. And he's, at the same time, he's looking at me for a little bit, and an equal amount of time looking to the other contestant, or candidate, maybe that's a better way to say it. And so he's going on like this for a little bit, and then looks at the other person and says, But today, the job goes to Norman. And he did that little phrase again, up and down. And he turned over at me at the last second, to me. And I remember it clear as absolute day. And, by that time I knew aspects of Bill. And so I was catching on to his way and style, or his theater, because we all have our theater, don't we? And we just always had a good relationship. And then I had to go up in the room and he put a contract in front of me. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. He was very patient. He didn't say, you can ask for more. I just said, whatever, And then he said, this orchestra has some of the best benefits in the country. And it was like going whoosh, to me. It didn't mean anything. I guess when you're 20, it's not going to. Well, it didn't to me. I wasn't even thinking like that. And he said, Norman, you might be here for 40 years. And that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And Bill, as you know, I got 32 of them. I had another 8 to go to get to the 40, but didn't do it. But he was always finding the best way to say something, I feel, at least with me. And then, there was the day-to-day stuff. And one of the things I remember, many, is when he would get on the stage at Symphony Hall, and he would have his glasses on. I don't have little reading glasses, but he put on his glasses, or they'd be there, these little teeny reading glasses, have a notebook in front of him, some pencil somewhere in his ear, if I don't stab myself. So he's sitting around like this. Mark a little something down. Look around. Maybe I should be doing it. He was very coordinated. He wasn't me. You wouldn't want me to be a personnel manager. So finally, Bill said, shh. Looking around the orchestra, kind of looks, he was just in front of the trombones when he was doing this, but he was trying to quiet everyone down so he could tune after he was taking attendance. And finally, he's going, shh, could you, shh. And he'd I don't have any hair, but he combed his hair and then he'd walk off. Sometimes say other couple words too, trying to get everyone quiet to tune. Anyway, it was a great theater. I looked forward to it every day he did it. We went to tour in Japan in 1978. My first time. He had a real affair with Japan. He even wrote a whole string quartet about Japan. And I think when he lived there for a while, I think he was part of the BSO's exchange program. I think he was there for a year. I'm not quite sure, though. And anyway, we're there, and we were in some kind of situation. I can't remember if we were in Tokyo or Osaka, but there was this big party, okay? And the party, basically, people were having a good time. And this person came out and took this, like, mallet-looking thing and, cracked open the barrel of sake. And Bill Moyer was one of the helpers. They got this little box, and he was pouring the sake into a little box, and of course you'd drink it. So I came up and got some, and he looked at me like this, drinking really wasn't my thing, but I was definitely going to do it. And so I was drinking, and he said, "Careful, Norman." So I'd have some more, and I started to talk with Todd Perry, who I think was like the general manager at that time of the Boston Symphony, and Uncle Sherm came over to me and said, "You're getting a little drunk." He said, "Just, that was Todd Perry you were speaking to." I said, "I know who that is, Sherm." And Tom Gager was saying, who was percussionist in the symphony. He said, "Well, you're a very happy, pleasant drunk." And I went, "I'm a drunk?" I thought to myself, sitting a little concerned. Bill Moyer came up to me and said, I thought I was going up to get a little more. He said, "Oh, Norman, once a trombone player, always a trombone player." Well, my little drinking career didn't last that long. But it was just such a funny time. And being the youngest has some interesting things going on in it. And I'd already been in the orchestra for 3 years. But, people treated you a certain way. And that's the Boston Symphony I remember. Incredible, great artists, unusual, with their own characters and everything. And Bill had his own character. Well, everyone does, but some people express it in certain kinds of ways. So, one time, I think it's when we were first in... another Japanese trip. Yeah. And I was on an elevator with Seiji Ozawa, Bill Moyer, maybe someone else, and Carol Proctor, a cellist in the orchestra. And Seiji came up to me and he would always box with me, right? He was doing this kind of thing with me, always treating me like a kid brother. He would kind of once in a while do this stuff. And so I was kind of laughing and saying some funny stuff, and Bill was always laughing when I was laughing. And so then I walked off the elevator. And later on that evening, Carol Proctor came up to me and she said, "When you got off the elevator, Bill Moyer said, 'That Norman, he has a rich inner life.'" And the thing is, I think he had a rich inner life. And we did talk about serious things, philosophical, spiritual. And anytime I felt that there was an opportunity for me to go to certain seminars or retreats, I'd ask if I could have time off, and he never, ever treated me funny about it at all. He knew it was important to me, and I think it's because in a certain way, in his own way, that was important to him. But I remember in 1981, during the BSO centennial, they had all these old photographs of the Boston Symphony. And what was interesting about it was, I'd be looking at it, and then there was the current one from 1981. And, at that time I was 26. And different people had just gotten in, and everyone was, I think, at the Harvard Club having a fun time. And in the hallway of Symphony Hall, this corridor, there were all these pictures, like I was saying. And Bill and I were looking at them. Or he saw me looking at them, then came over and stood next to me. And he started looking at them, going into a real headspace. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said, "Look at all of them. All those thoughts, all those feelings, gone." Because the picture we were looking at, everyone was gone. Like, it's hard for me sometimes to look at an old picture of the orchestra, and I go through and I go, at least 2/3 are are either retired or retired from the planet. Whole sections. And so I understand what he said deeper now. I felt it then too, because I always had to think about the transient nature of biological life. So we had serious times too. Some serious talks. And one time I got sick on tour. And this was like 1984. And my best friend in the orchestra, really in many ways, in certain kinds of ways, was Jerry Patterson. Wonderful cellist. But very unusual kind of person that I don't think a lot of people understood. Bill was always very nice to him, but always trying to encourage him in certain kinds of ways. So he was in the car, and Jerry was talking about, some issues that his son was doing at the time, like kids do. And Bill was very, oh no, you can't let him do that. You can't let him, you have to do this, this, and this. And the real structured Bill came out. And I met his son. I know he had an adopted daughter as well. And he told me all about that with such sentiment. Such sentiment. He came in and this babe to the airport, and the baby was wrapped in this, and he just took it. And the way he said it could bring tears to your eyes. It was just so real, so in awe, so thankful. So, now to explain a little bit about Not Again Norman. Well, I had some, how would you say? I had some, what would you call it? If you saw me doing something weird, it's because the computer decided to do its own thing. And luckily, I caught it. I was at the hall basically almost an hour and a half early before any service. Sometimes it got shortened to an hour, but I always got a warm-up. I always got myself settled, focused, all of that, and just give my time to be in that environment. And, of course, I had a very diligent warm-up. But on stage, please, 6 minutes on stage. Bill giving the 6-minute call. That was my signal to go to the locker and start putting on my tails. And I always waited to the last second for that. I was all ready to go. So but sometimes it'd take a little longer than I thought and all this stuff. It'd say, on stage, please, 3 minutes. Norman? So then I'd get there to go, Norman. So this would happen very regularly. And finally, I think it was getting to Bill a little bit. And so I'd go, one of the times, it's a big joke amongst the several of us in the orchestra who were in the orchestra at that time. Norman. Not again, Norman. Not again, Norman. In the same dot, but it was a little exasperated. But I did see him periodically when he left, of course, and then the last time I saw him was at Harry Shapiro's funeral. And I think we had a couple of communications since then, but not as many as I actually would have liked. So, Bill, wherever you are, thank you for our friendship and the smiles and the encouragement and the humor, the gratitude. I know you're in good hands and always will be.